The Sadducees and the resurrection. The same day came to him the Sadducees, which say that there is no resurrection, and asked him, saying, Master, Moses said, if a man die, having no children, his brother shall marry his wife, and raise up seed unto his brother. Now there were with us 7 brethren, and the first, when he had married a wife, deceased, and having no issue left his wife unto his brother. Likewise the second also, and the third unto the 7th. And last of all, the woman died also. Therefore in the resurrection, whose wife shall she be of the 7? For they all had her. Jesus answered and said unto them, Ye do err, not knowing the Scriptures, nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry, nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven. But as touching the resurrection of the dead, have ye not read that which was spoken unto you by God, saying, I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And when the multitude heard this, they were astonished at his doctrine. It was clearly intimated, in our Lord's observation respecting the leaven, that there was a habit of mind which was common to the opposing sects of the Jews. It is not enough to say that their common dislike to him proved the existence of this radical similarity. It was quite certain that in the course of their opposition, the inward nature of it would discover itself. Here was an occasion in which the Sadducees took up the line of argument, which would at other times have brought them in most direct collision with the Pharisees. They strove to embarrass our Lord with a case which must have served for the topic of many a debate and many a jest when they were refuting the doctors of the other school. And yet here our Lord detected a temper of mind very closely akin to that which he had just exposed in the men who asked him whether it was lawful to pay tribute unto Caesar. The idea of God as a Lord of the heart and reigns, as a spiritual being related to his spiritual creature, was wanting in the Pharisee. It was wanting also in the Sadducee. Neither, therefore, were able to enter into the history of their forefathers. The old commonwealth of Israel, the kingdom of David, the new city after the captivity, was not regarded by the Pharisees as really under the dominion of an invisible Lord, who was reigning over it from generation to generation. It was only a state separated by certain religious privileges and distinctions from all others, and entitled to look down upon them. The Roman yoke, therefore, was bitterly galling, but it never led them to cry out for a real, divine government, only for a government in which they should be supreme. The Sadducees had neither less nor more apprehension of a living God. They were not nominally atheists. Probably the most violent Pharisee would not have given them that name. But their belief was in a dead God, in one who had established a law or laid down maxims of morality, which men were thenceforth to keep for themselves, by which they were to regulate their conduct. But that this being was still, nay, that he had ever stood in any actual relation to his creatures, that he could communicate with them, or that they could in any actual sense call upon him, they did not and could not believe. Therefore they logically, consistently, honestly repudiated the idea of a resurrection. It was a loss, no doubt, to be without the relic and shell of such a conviction, to have said distinctly to themselves, our life is bounded by the conditions of it in this world. When the appearances of things disappear, we shall disappear with them. The laws which govern us are merely the circumstances in which we dwell. Man has nothing in him but that which is determined by measures of time and space. But so the Pharisee really believed also. His doctrine of a resurrection was merely the carrying out beyond the grave of all the low, selfish, carnal notions and maxims which had governed him on this side of it. To this cause we may attribute perhaps the mildness of the rebukes, ye do err, not knowing the Scriptures, nor the power of God, as compared with the why tempt ye me, ye hypocrites, in the former case. But the practical correction of the error was even deeper, and yet simpler than that which defined the difference between the obligations to Caesar and to God. Have ye not read in the Scriptures that God saith, I am the God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. Whatever you may think about the prophets, you acknowledge the simple records of the book of Genesis as having some worth. The principle of the resurrection is there. Once believe in God as the same yesterday and today, as the God of men from generation to generation, as really connected with them. Once believe him to be ever alive, and you believe in their life. And you become disentangled from these notions which have led you astray when you were considering whose wife the woman should be of the seven, for you begin to contemplate men in their higher relation to God, and therefore in higher relations to each other. Here is the preparation for all the after teaching respecting the resurrection. Its ground is laid in the deepest theology, and yet in the earliest revelation of God. Thus were the Sadducees taught, and the Pharisees no less, that to understand and believe in a resurrection, they must seek for someone in whom they could realize an actual relation to an actual and living being. Thus was the question presented to their minds whether their dislike to the idea of a Son of God was not the real inward ground of their dislike to the idea of a resurrection, and whether without the belief of a Son of God, a resurrection is anything but a dark and fearful vision of a probable promulgation and extension of the world's wretchedness. What think ye of Christ? While the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them, saying, What think ye of Christ? Whose son is he? They say unto him, The son of David. He saith unto them, How then doth David in spirit call him Lord, saying, The Lord said unto my Lord, Sit thou on my right hand, till I make thine enemies thy footstool. If David then call him Lord, how is he his son? And no man was able to answer him a word, neither durst any man from that day forth ask him any more questions. This question is given, with slight variations, in the 12th of Mark, from the 35th to the 38th verses, and in the 20th of Luke, from the 41st to the 45th verses. It is one of the few questions which our Lord is said by the three evangelists to have directly addressed to the people, or to the scribes, without any immediate provocation upon their part. It occurs in close connection with all the passages which we have lately been considering, and it is placed in all the Gospels very shortly before the last Passover. All evidently considered that though it led to no direct or obvious result, though it was a short question and one which found no answer, though our Lord raised the difficulty without giving the solution, it yet deserved an emphatical, enduring record. Did not every event they had been recording or were about to record, in fact, contain this question? Were not those events taken in connection with the whole past history of the nation, with all the future history of the human race, to give the reply? How is it possible that Christ can be both the Son of David and the Lord of David? How can he fail to be either if your scriptures are true? This was the tormenting, awful paradox to the Pharisee, the paradox in his own being as well as in the divine books, from which he could find but one way of delivering himself. After 18 centuries, it is still the question which is presented to every Jew and every Christian man, and which Christians as well as Jews are disposed to get rid of almost as the Pharisee did. If there is to be a king, a son of man over men, must he not be the Son of God? If there is a Son of God, must he not be the king over men? Could the Christ fulfill one character unless he fulfilled the other? The crucifixion was man's attempt to remove the difficulty. The resurrection was God's.